This is a City AM Studios production.
Hello and welcome back to Business as Usual, brought to you by Okta with me, Martin Kimber.
And me, Matt Kenyon. Coming up on the podcast today, the head of Google UK tells City AM that she's disappointed the government could ban kids from YouTube, while the tech giant plans to build a working relationship with the incoming Burnham government.
As future Prime Minister Andy Burnham gives a major speech on the economy, we'll dig into the next PM's plans for taxes, growth, and a number 10 in the north.
Plus, as an ESG reporting platform goes bust, is this another case of go woke, go broke? So we kicked off the week at Google's UK AI incubator office in a trendy part of East London, where we spoke to the head of Google UK. Kate Alessi told us that she was disappointed by the government's decision to include YouTube in the under-16 social media ban, but she praised Labour's AI policies so far in this parliament. These remarks come as Google releases a new in-depth report that's out today on the impacts of AI on the British economy and how the US tech giant is empowering businesses of all sizes. They claim that Google has been involved in economic growth of around £140 billion just in the last year alone. It was part of a longer conversation and we've condensed it for the sake of the podcast. But we began by asking how they at Google arrived at that £140 billion figure.
One of my core jobs is really to help people in the UK really reap the benefits of Google's products and services and tools. And so when you think about a number like 140 billion, it's really the way in which people and businesses are using Google's products and tools. So if you take products like search and AdWords, small businesses across the UK are using those products to reach their audiences, to reach new customers, to sell their products. And actually what's really amazing is that 60 billion of that number is attributed to small and medium-sized businesses using our products and services to sell their products.
The report delves quite deeply into who's using AI and to what level they're using it. Are we kind of headed for a bit of a new kind of jobs gap between genders, between ages, between locations and sectors? Like the report says that men are much more likely to be using AI than women. Is this going to create a kind of AI skills gap between men and women and the young and the old?
So right now, the data does suggest that there is a diversity in adoption, and we are seeing men using it more than women. We're seeing younger people using it more than older people. But the reality is that only 15% of the population is really using AI on an ongoing daily basis to really drive the productivity gains that it could give for them. So we actually see that 85% of the population all could be increasing their usage of AI. And we really want to make sure that we can drive widespread adoption, but also make sure that those individuals are using the technology effectively to make sure that we don't end up with this really broad skills gap. And so this is why we're so focused on training and why we launched our program AI Works for Britain to really make sure that we could help train people across the UK in how to use AI effectively. The really good news, though, is that it's actually quite simple to use AI. It really just takes your ability to ask a simple question into search to actually start to use AI. And with plain, simple language, you can prompt AI. You don't need a really sophisticated degree. You don't need to know how to code. You don't need to know how to use Python. You really just need to know how to use the tool by asking simple questions, and you can reap incredible benefits. So we think with that, we can ideally bring everybody up in terms of basic AI skills usage and not end up with the digital divide gap that we've seen in the past with other technology shifts.
On the topic of, I suppose, Google's approach to the UK market, it's pretty striking that, I suppose, one of your immediate predecessor has just gone to run the BBC as the new Director General. And I know that Matt Britton has said that YouTube is going to be a really key platform for the BBC. How do you envision your partnerships as Google with YouTube, with not only the BBC, but also other UK publishers going?
So, our partnerships are critically important. We remain very committed to the open web. And what you'll see with our AI advancements within search, with products like AI overviews and AI mode, we are deeply committed to make sure that those products continue to link people out to the web. And so we continue to invest in our partnerships with publishers like the BBC and others to really make sure that as we bring AI technology into our core search experience, we continue to do so in a way that continues to bring people back to our publishers.
AI has become one of the most sort of hopes for optimism for the UK economy. You guys and a bunch of others are all moving to King's Cross and expanding in King's Cross, creating a massive AI hub. AI is becoming a massive focus for our economy going forward. Have you seen or heard anything from the Andy Burnham camp, who is now almost certain to be the next Prime Minister, that gives you hope that he takes that industry seriously and that you're going to be able to work with him?
I mean, I can't comment yet on his policies as he's still working to roll out sort of what his overall agenda is. But I will say, broadly speaking, we've been very pleased to see sort of what the Labour Party has done thus far in terms of writing their AI action plan. I think that there is a big focus on AI because it's proven to be a real economic growth engine. We did research to really understand what is the potential economic uplift from AI. The report suggests that there's $400 billion of economic value that can be created through AI by 2030. But the reality is that half of that economic growth is dependent on AI adoption. So 200 billion of that value comes from people actually using these products and tools. And that's really why we've been so focused on this skills training and really making sure that people across the UK have access to the AI products and tools that we're building so that we can ultimately unlock that economic growth.
We were quite struck when the government announced its age restrictions on social media that YouTube was looped in on those restrictions, because it doesn't quite fit into the conventional definition of a social media platform. What did you make of that announcement?
So, at YouTube, we've been deeply committed to making sure we create a safe experience for children on our platforms. And that has been core to how we've built the product for 10 years. We've built experiences like YouTube for Kids, which is a kids-specific experience on YouTube. We create age-appropriate experiences for teens, and we've had parental supervision controls within the platform. And so this has been a core focus for us. I think it's deeply important. I'm a parent of 3 kids. I think creating safe experiences for children online is critically important. And it's something that we've been deeply committed to at YouTube. We will continue to work with the government to make sure that we build the best product we can to create a safe environment for children online.
So is it a bit disappointing then that a lot of those efforts seem to have been for naught if they've banned it anyway?
Well, right now we're waiting to see what the government's policy is. They've given the high level sort of message around this, and we're waiting to see how it actually rolls out. It is disappointing in some respects in the sense that, 74% of children use YouTube to learn for education purposes, right? 50% of YouTube today is watched in the living room as a streaming platform with families. And so it's challenging to think about how this will actually be implemented for a product like YouTube. And I do worry that there's incredible content and value that's derived from the immense video library of incredible content that we have on the platform. And I think limiting people's access to all of that rich educational content is challenging. And so we'll wait to see how it plays out.
And you can watch that whole exchange on City AM's YouTube channel right now. It's well worth a watch. It was a really cool space as well, actually, I thought. Very futuristic and
cool.
snazzy.
It was. It reminded me of those memes about Google offices in Silicon Valley, how there are beanbags everywhere and everyone's like, I don't know, playing sports. They had an AI penalty scoring area.
Yeah, an F1 arcade machine type thing.
It was a bit of a shame not to have a few hours to play around in there. We had to get in and out quite quickly.
Alas, we had to return to City AM to create shareholder value. You can go back and watch that on YouTube now. Right, coming up after the break, Andy Burnham sets out his economic vision for Britain in a keynote speech, minus any questions from the press. Christian May's up next.
This episode is brought to you by Okta. AI agents are everywhere now, quietly making decisions across organisations. That's great until you stop and think, who's in charge?
If you don't know who an agent is, what it's connected to, or what it's allowed to do, you can't really trust it to act in your interests. That's the bit Okta focuses on. They secure the identity of AI agents, so there's one clear layer of control across the whole system.
Which means every agent has a clear identity permissions, and a line of accountability, even as things scale.
Risk becomes something you manage, not guess at. Secure every agent, secure any agent. Opta secures AI. Welcome back. Now, Matt, bad news. Andy Burnham has vowed to end business as usual. Wait, no, it says politics as usual. Politics as usual, forgive me. Now, the MP for Makerfield and soon to be the PM of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Andy Burnham, has given a keynote speech on his plans for the future of the UK economy. He pledged more state control over utilities, a massive council house building programme, and promised to move more government functions to the north of England. Joining us now to dig into what was said is our editor-in-chief, Christian May. Christian, your reaction to that speech?
Well, he's not short on ambition. I'll give him that. Armed only with one by-election victory, he now tells us he's going to oversee the greatest change to the way in which this country is run in any of our lifetimes. And politically, that's obviously extremely interesting, and parts of it, I think, sound superficially quite attractive. There wasn't much in there about quite how he's going to pay for all this. And also, you have to think about the detail. If you take even just half of what it is he's pledging to do, this absolutely enormous devolution agenda, the legislative paperwork sends the mind into a spin. You know, completely rewrite and overhaul the Local Government Acts, probably completely rewrite and overhaul the Town and Country Planning Act. Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. My main reaction was that, first of all, I could picture Keir Starmer watching it and thinking, oh, that's how you do it.
Yeah.
It was very good. I mean, the guy's got charisma. He's fizzing with ideas. You know, even I, when I suspend my journalistic skepticism, found myself getting a little swept up in the hope and the rhetoric and the vision. But it is our jobs to pull ourselves back down to earth and to pull our listeners and readers back down to earth. It was incredibly ambitious, and it makes me think, and not in a good way, of Liz Truss. And it makes me think of the comparison, because like Liz Truss, coming in without a personal mandate, coming in, taking over from your predecessor without a general election, and totally rewriting the direction you want to take the country in, it does strike me somewhat that he's acting as if we can afford any of this, and he's acting as if he has a mandate for it. He says he will stay within the letter or the numbers of the fiscal rules, and indeed within the spirit of Labour's 2024 manifesto. But I would be very surprised if he can do either of those things.
I thought the most striking line in his whole speech was when he said, "The political direction I set won't be up for negotiation," which felt like it was a massive challenge to Labour's backbenchers, who essentially sank Keir Starmer's government by not allowing him to pass legislation around welfare and other sort of economic measures that he needed to. Do you think that this control and sway that Andy Burnham needs to and wants to have over his own party will materialise?
There's an interesting contradiction there that he says none of this will be up for debate, which is slightly, it makes me think of the flogging will continue until morale improves. None of this will be up for debate. At the same time, he wants to do something creative with the whipping system. He made a point of saying he doesn't like the traditional whipping system in Westminster of cajoling party good conduct. So that'll be an interesting one for him to figure out. It depends. If Labour MPs are still so swept up with relief and enthusiasm that he has managed to defeat reform, that he's managed to seize control of the Labour Party and promise this bold new direction, then maybe they'll go along with him. But I doubt they'll go along with him forever. To say nothing of the rest of Parliament. It is such an incredibly ambitious agenda that honestly sounded like, I don't know whether it sounded more like a speech ahead of a general election or one having just won a massive general election. But it's going to be very difficult for him to make the case that even half of what he set out in this speech, which I say again was a very well delivered speech, even if he didn't take any questions from journalists at the end of it, it's going to be hard for him to set much of this into practice without the most extraordinary exertion of political capital in Westminster. Now, he doesn't like Westminster very much. He made that clear. He came down to London, did some selfies. He went back up to Manchester to give this speech and told them all that things in Westminster are even worse than he thought. And he says that we're all too divided, we're arguing, and he painted a vision of what it would be like if we could all just get along.
He's very passionate about devolution and the North, and he wants to sort of start a number 10 in the North. Do you think a lot of this narrative that all this money has just been pouring into the South and the North has been slightly forgotten, is that a slightly older, slightly out of date narrative? Because another newspaper called the Financial Times,
Who?
I know, and a firm called Public First found that since the Brexit vote, overwhelming amount of money via the Levelling Up Fund and various other funds has gone to the North and Midlands, with affluent London boroughs such as Richmond and Kingston receiving almost nothing, and even poorer parts of the capital such as Redbridge receiving far less than the North. So is he sort of maybe slightly late to the party on this?
That's a really interesting point, because I was thinking about this ahead of a column I'll write on this very topic. I can remember the 2010 Conservative Party manifesto, which was called An Invitation to Join the Government of Britain. And it was full of everything Andy Burnham just said about radical devolution, about giving local authorities and local communities much more power over services and much more influence over policy and indeed more money. And after that, we then had George Osborne's Northern Powerhouse agenda, which gave us all sorts of things, including a mayoralty in Manchester. Of course, that's where Andy Burnham's been for the last few years. So there's nothing inherently new about pointing out the imbalance, if you like, between the North and the South. To put it crudely, of course, it's not a uniform picture. So it's not only slightly old-fashioned, it's slightly out of date. Now, to take Andy Burnham at his word, what he wants to do is not just constantly transfer money from wealthy parts of the country to the rest. I mean, we've been doing that for a very long time. He wants all parts of the country to enjoy what he calls good growth in every postcode, he says, and he wants those regions and cities and indeed the nations of the UK to start paying their own way. And who could be against that? It sounds fantastic. But one of my least popular or least trendy opinions is that devolution is wildly over fetishized in this country. And we can look at the example of Scotland and Wales the last couple of decades and see how it's paid off. And almost everything the Welsh and Scottish governments have touched has been a disaster, not least in health and education. So the idea that local councils, who can't seem to get potholes right at the moment, are going to become efficient and expert managers of water and utilities and transport and building, I think is probably for the birds.
Well, Christian, we will let you return to your devolved number 10 in your office in the newsroom. But thank you.
There's no second power base in City AM.
Absolutely not. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
And finally, an ESG reporting platform, which had the backing of the government-owned British Business Bank, has gone bust. Is this another sign of a further climb down on corporate climate commitments? Well, Michael Hunter joins us to discuss. Welcome back, Michael.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
Michael is our sort of climate commentator and weather commentator.
Yes, you have been. We're approaching you earlier in the week this time.
Just quickly, it's going to be sunny on Thursday.
Hey!
Just get that out there straight away. But unless...
Oh, no, you've shot our fox now. For the first
well, with my name Hunter, that's why I'm here.
Well, that's very fair.
Shooting all part of the service. Now, I think we're seeing again another sign that the ESG boom, the green governance boom that swept the square mile for so long, boosting the coffers of so many city firms, helping companies chart exactly their environmental, social and governance impact, that we're seeing that unravel before our very eyes. This is another example of how all of that revenue that was out there for the taking for so long is now very much not as readily available. With Worldwide Generation operating the platform known as G17 Eco, has failed.
Their choice of branding might have contributed to that, because that title is not easy to remember.
No, it sounds like an international summit.
Yes.
An international summit that for some reason will still include Keir Starmer in a year's time. So what's been the story here? Like, is this a surprise, this news? Has there been a steady decline as that macro trend has taken hold in the last couple of years?
Any kind of failure like that amounts to a surprise in one way or another. But I think the wider trend is much less of a surprise. So the mania in some ways for a different way to measure capitalism, which was controversial among some people in the city throughout its life, was certainly something that was helping people earn a few quid, get new businesses set out, have a look at the business of money, the business of doing business in a different way. And there's a hangover, a long tail from that now. So where once all you needed to do in order to attract business was say, we can help you measure your impact. Now the companies that were doing exactly that are struggling for business, and the smaller ones, such as this one, are actually not getting any business at all now.
It is a long tail because, I mean, the television programme Industry, all about these sort of traders and bankers and stuff, they were sort of approaching this subject years ago?
What
season?
2020? I think it was 2022.
Yeah.
They did the
ES-
the COVID bubble.
Yeah.
The COVID era ESG bubble has already burst. They predicted that
in 2022. Yeah. So
and then by the time that Trump came in, it felt like it probably gave the market permission. Because there always was a bit of a fallacy in trying to sell products to companies on the basis of this is going to make you look better.
Sure.
It always felt like there was something quite superficial and bubbly
I
about
think
that.
they were trying to get past the superficial bubbliness into a different realm and into a different and sustained way of measuring capitalism differently. And of course, I think it's rather ironic that very process became a boom and bust of its own.
And there are companies that you wouldn't expect to be ESG compliant that are, because ESG isn't just climate and environmentalism. It's also it's sort of how you treat your workers and all that sort of stuff. So there are some companies that are actually ESG compliant that you wouldn't expect to.
Very much so. And there was, for instance, major tobacco companies are known for having very high ESG compliance scores in very many ways, which relates to how they do sustainable farming and how they've been quite progressive in treating their workforce.
I'm stunned by that.
Even if the products themselves aren't terribly good for the consumers. So that kind of thing, while well-intentioned, has also cast a shadow, even at the height of the boom, over this kind of activity. And we're seeing it peter out all the way through now. So the company that's gone under there, according to the latest files with Companies House, it employed around 24 people. So that's not nobody. It's a decent enough headcount for a small business. But it racked up cumulative losses of around £13 million. And it's done a funding round from shareholders worth about £2 million in March last year. So despite growing to really quite decent size and getting some support from a funding round relatively recently, this process that can give a decent rating to a tobacco company for economic and social governance is not something that looks enormously sustainable itself at the moment.
Well, our sympathies are with everyone who lost their jobs with the company's
Absolutely.
collapse. Michael, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll be talking about this again. As this is one of the big, as you say, macro trends at the moment. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I'm going for a cigarette and a lie down. Well, that's just about all we have time for today. Thank you so much for listening to Business as Usual, brought to you by Okta.
Don't forget to subscribe to City AM's daily and weekly newsletters. And of course, as ever, don't forget to download our free app.
It's got everything the expensive news apps have, except it's free. We'll be back in your podcast feeds tomorrow at 6 a.m. But for now, goodbye.
Goodbye.